I know that Hillary had talked about maybe sponsoring a UBI, on her platform in 2016, and Biden and Obama had talked with Yang, and they've had contact. I mean, why do you think there's so much resistance, despite all that, to a UBI?
Yeah. Well, I do think that many folks in the Democratic Party power structure have been raised and grew up and were forged in a world where federal programs were super effective and powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And anything that potentially curtailed the size of federal programs would be assumed to be, kind of Reagan, Thatcher type, slash government, scorched earth camp. And I think there's just a general like, whoa, wait a minute. It's sort of like if you grew up thinking that butter was unhealthy, and then someone's like, hey, we should add more butter to our diet. You'll be like, no. That's crazy. That'll give you a heart attack. So I think there's just a, sort of decades of dogma that's about, hey, anything that isn't a new government program is a bad thing. The second thing is that UBI, it is not an easy thing to grok in a few seconds. It is the opposite of Medicare for all. Like Medicare for all, people they hear it, they like it, they want it right away. Now we could argue over like whether actually that's the best thing or not, but it from a political point of view, it lands. Make America great again. Lands.
Right.
Universal basic income, or and credit to Andrew who knew that wasn't a good name. So freedom dividend, but still, it's like what free money? Nah. So you have to. I don't think we found a way to sell UBI, and until we do, if you have a policy that requires people to listen to like a 2-hour Joe Rogan interview to get it, like it's going to be hard. So I think we still need to figure out how to communicate this policy in a way that's going to land not with the folks that frankly watch your show and my show that are really into politics, but it needs to land with the people that barely ever think about politics but still vote. And we haven't found. I don't think we found that.
I think I agree with you on that one. So with one other topic I wanted to discuss with you before we close out here, and that is, well, two of them actually. Just in general, kind of full circling back to just politics in Switzerland versus America. I mean, kind of what are some of the positives that you've seen, that you've experienced there versus America, and like what would you recommend in the future for here?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I could. I don't want to be presumptuous. Like America is a much bigger, more complicated place with a different history in Switzerland. Okay. But what I will say is that these Swiss, every few months, they get this thick briefing doc of all of the basically what we would call in the States referendums, right? And it has like pro, con, and then it has like the official recommendation from Parliament, but then like the advocate of the one position, and then the sort of detractor, and they read all that stuff, and they're super engaged, and they take it really, really seriously, because their view is it's our government, this is our country. And we're responsible for making the right decision. We're not going to just outsource it to a bunch of folks in D.C. and blame them when we don't like the results. Like we are going to make
ownership,
the call, right? Imagine if there were a national referendum on healthcare reform. Like then people would have to read up on it, and well, we would hope that. Of course, I know a lot of people hearing this are going to point out Brexit was a freaking disaster, and so. The population needs to have a tradition, or needs to build a tradition of voter high information gathering. But I respect that. I feel like, in fact, that barber I was talking about, it was funny because, you know, I grew up in America where we always were referring to ourselves as like the world's greatest democracy. And she was saying, like, how is it that you guys are democracy? Like, you have this one person in the office, in this Oval Office, that has so much power. Like, he can declare war, and then just some people in the Senate agree with him, and like, there's no national referendum when you want to go to war. And she's like, why don't you think we ever go to war? Because we would have to vote. Nobody wants to go to war. Like, unless you're being invaded.
Wow.
Jeff, you really don't want to. So I would love to see America, all of us, the same way we get fired up about, you know, standing during the national anthem. You better go and vote, man. You know, it's great. Yeah, I get the patriotism, but if you're not going and voting, and if you're not taking the time to inform yourself before you vote, then all of the Star Spangled Banners that you put your hand on your heart for, like, I don't know, like, is that the most patriotic thing? To me, the most patriotic thing is like, wow, we are the world's greatest experiment in democracy. People have died for the rights that I have to vote. I need to take this seriously. And because also my vote will determine who is going to make crucial decisions, not just about the country, but often the world. So that was number one. Number two is, you know, I've noticed that American individualism has so many powerful virtues to it, like this kind of rugged independence, and this notion that, like, you know, anyone can be like the next Steve Jobs. Like, you could be from nowhere, and you could be a captain of industry, and that's amazing. But I will also say, like, things like I was just mentioning earlier, we were taking this hike, and I was saying to my wife, like, we have been walking for hours on these trails, and I have not seen a single piece of trash, like not a single old can or a bubblegum wrapper or an old Doritos wrapper, you know, like nothing. And the reason is, it's not because it's not a well-traveled trail. Like, a lot of people like to hike in that area, but it's the sense that everybody, this is ours. Like, we're all responsible to each other. And I feel like our kind of like, in America, we kind of look after ourselves, but we don't really do as much at a community level, in terms of all feeling responsibility to do the right thing for the community. That'd be the second thing. And then the third thing would be, you know, I just wish we weren't as polarized as we are in the U.S. Like, this whole Fox thing is just, it's terrible. It's like listening to two spin factories, and it's very frustrating. And I worry because I know most voters get their information from the single sources, you know, one of those two. And, you know, that leads to people voting for representatives that will never work with the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other major themes you got going on in America, and I don't know if it's true in Switzerland, is racial tension, you know, especially in this time. I mean, what's been your own experience about, you know, the way people receive you in Switzerland versus, say, here in America?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I live in Zurich. It's a pretty international place. Like, there's like 30% expatriates because of all the banks and stuff. You know, Switzerland has a lot of foreign kind of talent or whatever. So I've not experienced much here other than, interestingly enough, like, they assume that you speak fluent German, even though I don't. They assume that I know all the local rules and customs, even though I don't. So I think there's an expectation of assimilation here. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it is what it is. I was actually just talking. I have two sons, 10 and 12, so they're kind of in formative years, and, you know, they hear the news and they hear all that's going on. And so we were watching this documentary on the history of slavery, and the Europeans are not without sin on their soul in terms of the royal kind of British influence on the West Indies and stuff like that. But I will say, growing up as a minority in the U.S. Was not easy, because I grew up in a neighborhood where we were pretty much like the only Asian American family. And my parents were immigrants. So for my dad, English was not his first language. And, we didn't know the rules for baseball or football or, like we just didn't.
As a side note, I'm just curious real quickly while you're saying that, because I was going to ask you earlier, given that Trump often, sends out dog whistles, I mean, how does your mother, I mean, how do your parents typically rectify that, sort of cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, even though she is ethnically Chinese and she was born in mainland China, because our family had such a difficult history with the Chinese Communist Party, we were on the other side. Our family was on the other side. And she hates them. So anytime Trump is talking trash about China, she's like, rah, rah. Right. And, that's why a lot of people, even though I don't know anything about Yang's family, but I believe they're from Taiwan. If you want to find a group that doesn't like mainland China, like, there are very few groups that are anti-mainland China. Like, of course, parts of Taiwan, like, they might. Generally, most Taiwanese have a very kind of suspicious view of China. But yeah, so growing up Asian American, was hard, just because you want to feel accepted, and you want to feel, American. And when you watch the news or go and see a movie, when I was growing up, there weren't a whole lot of. I think the only movie that had a prominent Asian American or ethnic Asian characters was like 16 Candles, and it wasn't a very positive characterization. So, or at that time there were a lot of Vietnam War movies, like Platoon, and so that wasn't a very positive view of Asian people that look like me.
Right.
So it was tough, but like I was telling my sons, if you grow up as a black male in America, statistically, you're like 5 times more likely to be killed by a policeman, and you're multiple times more likely to end up in prison, and you're multiple times more likely to end up in prison again if you're released. It's just, and you're more likely to end up poorer than where you started relative than if you had the same kind of economic background but were white. So I have to say I'm blessed that we haven't had to deal with the struggles that I think Black Americans have. But
right.
It wasn't all roses growing up as a minority.
I think some of that can be attributed to just familiarity with people of different backgrounds, along with demographic changes, different shifting populations, and how that impacts politics, economics, and society at large. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, we've certainly come a long way. Like, I mean, as in terms of the Asian American community, I was just looking at the demographics. I think it's going to approach 10% soon. And certainly it was like low single digits when I was growing up. So I think that, plus you are starting to see more positive Asian American kind of role models and things. I mean, I think Andrew is a great. I wish there were an Andrew Yang when I was growing up, but I grew up with Reagan and Carter and, Dole, and those are like the whitest people you could find. So, so I think we've made progress there. It's still, I think there is still an interesting thing with the races where let's say if Andrew Yang's if you took his brain and you put it inside of Cory Booker's body, we'd probably be calling Cory Booker the nominee.
Interesting.
So I do think, and Andrew's background, was a hurdle that he had to get over.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it brings up that, like, even though there are many disadvantages African Americans carry, they also carry some advantages over other minorities as well. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, how that comes together like that. Yeah, I think you're right. Fascinating. So at any rate, I think that's pretty much. Anything else you'd like to discuss before we shut out today?
Let's see. No, I guess I would just say for all the listeners, if you're interested in hearing more from me, usually on the other side of the table. So Joshua, thank you for letting me kind of switch roles, because I'm so used to asking people questions. Yep. It's fun to be an interviewee. Yep. But yeah, they can check out Nerds for Humanity. I'm on YouTube and Twitter. And if you have to like data and charts, I'm not the most entertaining channel.
Don't let him fool you. He's got a lot more than that. Yeah, definitely great interviews, great questions. He brings up awesome topics. So definitely worth checking out. I'll put all of that in the description section below. So definitely check out Tom over at Nerds for Humanity, correct?
Correct.
And also check out his merchandise site. He's got like apparel on there and accessories. So that's an awesome site. How's that coming along, by the way? I mean, doing all right with that?
Yeah, well, we just started it a few days ago. You're totally on top of things, Joshua. I respect that.
Thanks.
But I had a lot of fun designing the stuff, like working with a designer, and I'm actually going to do more. I think there's been like 5 or 6 T-shirt sales, so it's better than nothing, and I'm just excited that people cared enough about the channel to want to wear the merch, and hopefully there'll be more.
I mean, do we expect to see you want to maybe grow even more and eventually consider this as sort of like a large level, or you want to just kind of do this as a part-time ultimately? Like, where are you going with this eventually, you think? It's just so spontaneous.
Yeah, well, like we talked about, it started out as a spontaneous kind of experiment. And obviously the channel, for me, has gone way beyond my expectations. Luckily, I've always been a political junkie. So I've been watching like Meet the Press. I don't think I've missed a Meet the Press since like the 90s. Like I've been watching that religiously. So I love politics. I love policy. So my expectation is I'll keep doing it. It's a hobby for me. Okay. Someday, like if it got bigger and I could do it full time, like it would pretty much be my dream job. Awesome. But for now, I'll just keep doing it.
All right, guys. You guys heard Tom, so check out his channel. Help him support his dream. Dream job.
I appreciate it.
One last question. Maybe this is pushing it too far, but do you think you'd ever go into politics?
Potentially.
Okay.
I think the biggest concern is the financial impact on my family. Right, and so my wife doesn't work. She works very hard as a full-time mom. But I'm the sole kind of breadwinner in terms of cash compensation. And I do have the 2 boys. And they're 10 and 12, and I want to make sure I can provide for them. And then my mom's, getting on in years, and so I provide some help to her.
A lot of priorities going on there.
Yeah. So I think the biggest concern would be how do you just do that? Like we're talking about fiscal responsibility. Like how do I do that the right thing for the family? And then of course the second thing is the difficulty of landing a seat. Like you can run, but it doesn't. So the goal would be to win, right? So you'd have to pick up you could win. And then I think the third thing is like, could you? Let's say you won. Would you have the impact that you wanted? So obviously Congress would be the most obvious place that a lot of people try, and you wonder, like, what do they get done in 2 years? And if you flip it, like, let's say Nerds for Humanity grew by 10 times. I don't know, man. Like, I could have as much impact.
Right. You're right. That's right. Yeah,
So I'm
that's a very good point.